Hi, AP Environmental is me, Miss Willis, and we are going to discuss endangered species and the legislation that protects these vulnerable species. So let's go ahead and get started. One very important piece of legislation that was passed here in the United States is called the US Endangered Species Act. It was passed in 1973 and it made it illegal to import or trade any products that were on what we now call the endangered species list. So once an organism does get placed on the US endangered species list, it cannot be taken or threatened, killed, or harmed, and the habitat in which it lives cannot be harmed. And of course, the goal is once this organism gets placed on a list, a recovery plan is made for the species to be able to increase the numbers of that population. In the US Endangered Species Act, there are some terms that you should probably be aware of. So a species can be listed as threatened. And if the species is threatened, that means it has very few individuals and it is almost endangered. So the population is in trouble, but not huge trouble. Like we're noticing there are decreases with the population and it could be an issue. So a good example of a threatened species here in the United States is the polar bear. Another example of a threatened species is the grizzly bear. It is listed as threatened on the US Endangered Species Act. And remember, these are species that need to be or reside in the United States. The northern spotted owl is also listed as threatened on the US Endangered Species Act, and this is primarily due to habitat loss in its forests. The problem is that this owl needs a lot of old growth forests, and those really are only found in the Pacific Northwest. They are the top predators of the area and are specialists, so they do have a specialized diet and so forth. So all of these three things really have contributed to its threatened status. An endangered species is one in which the population is in real trouble. There are not very many individuals left of that population and it is at risk of becoming extinct. So an example of an endangered species here in the United States is the sand cat. Also, another example is the white abalone. We have these here off the coast of California. And the California condor is probably the most notorious endangered species. It is a scavenger bird and it does eat dead carcasses. In 2005, there were only 273 individuals of the condor left. This led scientists to pull them out of their natural habitat because it was just too dangerous for them to be in it. They rehabilitated them, they bred them in captive breeding programs, and they are still currently listed as endangered, but they're doing much better. Also, it doesn't help that they have very low birth rates and late sexual maturity, so that does not increase their populations very quickly. What was causing the deaths of these condors was a variety of things: poaching for their feathers, lead poisoning from bullets from hunters, DDT from pesticide usage, and unfortunately, sometimes they would just fly into power lines. Sometimes when you want to rehabilitate endangered species, there are things that reside inside of them, intrinsic characteristics that make it very difficult to bring the population back. So for example, some of these species you're going to notice are extremely localized. They're only found in one place or can be endemic or require a large amount of territory. They may have low birth rates, so instead of producing maybe 50 babies at one time, they'll only do 1 or 2. They sometimes reside on islands or are just very extreme specialists, so they require a very specialized diet. They don't adapt well to changing conditions, and sometimes it takes them a very long time to reach that sexual maturity. Another category used is the extinct species category, and I think you all probably know that this is when the species no longer exists on Earth. There have been about 1,000 documented. But of course, we all know that many more have passed on without us knowing. And so a very famous one is the dodo species. Here are some examples of some extinct species. So we have the Tacopa putfish, which is a very small fish. And the Yangtze river dolphin has been officially declared as a extinct species. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Sometimes known as the baji. And the last sighting of it was in 2004. You might be asking what caused its decline. Well, it lived in the Yangtze River, and there was heavy transportation on this river, lots of big boats and collisions. We have overfishing in the river. Dams are being built, like the Three Gorges Dam is on this river, and water pollution. So all of these contributed to the decline of the dolphin. Another one that you may have known, which was at one time the world's most abundant bird, it's the passenger pigeon. And there were approximately 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons on this earth about 200 years ago, and we killed them all, mainly sometimes sport hunting, maybe eating. This was the last one. It is currently stuffed on display, but Martha was the last one ever in the United States, and it died in 1914. There are two different types of extinction, so let's compare the two. The first one is a background extinction, and this is where about 3 to 30 species die each year. And it's thought that these species die out due to natural selection. So nature is selecting which organisms are best fit for their environment. Compare that to a mass extinction. A mass extinction is where you have about 1,000 species dying each year, and it's usually caused by some sort of environmental change. We've had about 5 to 6 so far. One example would be like the wipeout of the dinosaurs thanks to the meteor. And some scientists will argue that humans are causing the 6th mass extinction here on Earth. So really, what is causing pretty much all the extinction here on Earth? We got too many people on this earth, not enough natural resources. We have laws that don't really support species. And lastly, we have very high consumption rates. We tend to consume things we don't necessarily need. There are some international laws that exist to protect species. An international law that you should probably know about is CITES. It's the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. And what this list does, so if the organism is put on this list, it does prohibit the trade of these live specimens or products to any country that, of course, abides by CITES. Now, instead of using threatened, endangered, and extinct like the US Endangered Species list uses, it uses what are called appendices. And so, for example, Appendix 1 means endangered, and if you're Appendix 2, that means you are threatened. And so an organism can actually be on both lists. So it can be on the CITES list, so international trade, and then of course it can be on the United States Endangered Species list if it resides in the United States. There's also the IUCN's Red List, and the Red List uses its own terminology. This red list was created to assess the conservation status of different species found around the world, and they use the words critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. So if you want to think about it, like vulnerable is threatened, endangered is endangered, and critically endangered means, ooh, that organism is in trouble. The International Whaling Commission was also created to regulate whaling that was taking place around the world. And so it does ban, of course, whaling and gill netting and purse seines that are used. And then keep in mind, though, that not all countries have signed on to this whaling commission. Japan, Finland, and Iceland have not signed. And lastly, let's not forget about the United States Marine Mammal Protection Act. This was established in 1972 to protect all marine mammals in the United States waters. So all of them are protected. And what does that mean? You cannot take any marine mammals. You cannot harm them or hurt them in any way. They are definitely protected by law. Okay, everyone, that concludes our little talk on endangered species. I hope that was great. Talk to you later.